Great, so we'll call the regular meeting of Township Council for the purpose of a public hearing to order for Monday, April 29th. And of course, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular, our valued relationships with the Katzie, Kwantlen, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. Mr. Richardson, you read the preamble? Or play?
A public
play
hearing
the
is a
preamble.
statutory requirement under Section 464 of the Local Government Act and must be held before third reading of a community plan, land use contract amendment bylaw, heritage designation bylaw, or heritage revitalization agreement bylaw. During a public hearing, council acts in a quasi-judicial role for the purpose of allowing persons who believe their interest in property is affected by a bylaw, permit, or other matter to make representations to council, either orally, by written submission, or to add comments to or elaborate upon correspondence that may have already been presented to council concerning the bylaws. It is important to note that council is not able to receive any additional information on the bylaws following the public hearing as dictated by case law. The hearing procedure involves an explanation from the Community Development Division on the purpose of the proposed bylaws and to hear from individuals regarding the bylaws. In order to ensure that all interested parties have a reasonable opportunity to be heard, speakers are requested to keep representations as brief and succinct as possible and no longer than 5 minutes in duration, excluding the time required for questions from council. Speakers will be asked to state their name, neighborhood, and city for the record. And if referring to prepared remarks, to submit copies of these to the township clerk. Decorum must be always maintained. This includes refraining from applause, booing, or heckling. To assist with large numbers of speakers, individuals must advise the township clerk and sign the speakers list prior to the commencement of the public hearing. The names on the speakers list will be read out during the hearing. Individuals who have already addressed council and wish to add further submissions will wait until the people that have not yet addressed council have had an opportunity to speak. All submissions and speaker lists are considered part of the public record. Council members should not express their views nor debate the bylaws. However, they may question speakers to clarify particular points in their submissions. Council may consider third reading or third reading and final adoption at this meeting or at its next regular meeting. Thank you.
So I get a motion to adopt the agenda, moved by Councillor Rent, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Any discussion? Call the question on A1. Carries unanimously. Mr. Richardson, item B1.
Thank you, Worship. The subject development permit application pertains to a proposed residential development consisting of 303 apartment units and 2 5-story and 2 6-story buildings at 20733 78th Avenue. The 3.79 acre site is designated multifamily in the Willoughby Community Plan and medium density apartment in the Yorkson Neighborhood Plan. This air photo depicts the site located on the west side of 200th Street, north of 78th Avenue. The site is zoned Comprehensive Development Zone CD96, accommodating the proposed use and density. This slide indicates the proposed site plan with vehicular access to the east and west portions of the site from a roadway connecting to 78th Avenue. The next series of slides indicate elevations, streetscape, and landscape plan. Staff recommend council issuance of development permit 101424, subject to 7 conditions listed on page 12 of council's agenda. Your worship, total of 530 notices were mailed out, 12 written submissions have been received, and there are 4 individuals noted on the speakers list, the first 2 being Noran Hayward and Pauline Hornan, your worship.
Is it inappropriate, Mr. Richardson, for you to give a bit of a differentiation between this process and a public hearing and the difference between a development permit and a rezoning bylaw?
Certainly, worship. So I guess starting with the rezoning matter, as outlined in the spoken preamble, rezoning bylaw deals with items such as use and density for a rezoning bylaw or an associated bylaw in that sense. The subject application this evening is for a development permit. and that's strictly relating to the adopted development permit guidelines that are applicable to the site and deal strictly with form, siting, and character of the application. As you correctly identified, that the items respecting use and density have already been established via the zone that's already been applied to the property. So once again, Your Worship, the distinction there that the discussions this evening deal not with use or density, but of siting, form, and character as they relate to the development permit guidelines.
And the difference between a public input opportunity and a public hearing?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the public input opportunity is one where under our procedures bylaw and under legislative provisions, council at their discretion has provided for this public input opportunity here this evening. It's one that's over and above and not provided for in provincial legislation, but one that council, at its consideration of this application, wanted this specific opportunity for members of the public to be notified and have this opportunity here this evening, once again, to speak to form, siting, and character, Your Worship.
Great. So if there's any questions about that, please feel free to ask them. We have a bit more flexibility on a public input opportunity than we do on a public hearing. So with that, for item B1, the first speaker is Noran Hayward. Please come forward.
Yes, good evening. My name is Noran Hayward, and I live at 509A, 20716 Willoughby Town Center Drive in Langley. I have been a resident there now for just over 3 years. We didn't buy brand new. We bought from an existing owner. When we first bought our place, we were quite surprised. We couldn't find it, okay? Our address is 20716 Willoughby Town Center Drive. But we are actually on a kind of a lane access that goes behind the Kensington condo development and the retail outlets on Willoughby Town Center Drive. So it was a little awkward, and still to this day I have trouble directing people to find our place. And that is one of my main concerns. I have submitted a written application, or a written submission, I said prior already. My main concern is the lane access, and it truly is a lane. It is not a roadway. At one point, this lane is only 6 meters, which is just over 19 feet, which is quite narrow. And when you have trucks coming in, delivery trucks coming in, garbage trucks coming in, recycling, you name it, coming in, it is bedlam. Okay, it's very awkward. It's exceptionally difficult to make. First of all, when you come in, you have to make a sharp left turn. And when you make that sharp left turn, there is a brick building, which is the stairwell for the Kensington condo development from their underground, and it blocks your view. So vision is a terrible, it's deadly, okay? And someday, somebody's gonna go around that corner and hurt somebody. There are sidewalks on one side, which is our development side, but there are not sidewalks on the other because it's a parking lot. And it's through a parking lot access. What's interesting too is when I looked at the drawings and the plans, the architect has actually allowed 24 feet in the underground parking lot of these 4 new buildings between rows of parked cars. So obviously, somebody felt they had to have 24 feet to maneuver vehicles into a parking spot, yet we only have 19 feet in our laneway to maneuver cars. When you come out of either A building or B building, you come up a steep ramp, and that ramp, you have to, it's difficult to stop because you're quite steep. Then you have to make a sharp left turn coming out of A, or a sharp right turn coming out of B. They face each other directly. So now you have to be aware, is there somebody coming out of B building? If this laneway goes through, now I have to be aware of somebody coming off my right side, and there's a retaining wall there. So my vision is now blocked. And according to the site plan that the architect has put forth, that laneway goes south, but it turns west. So it's got a curve to it. So it's not a straight laneway through. It's now turning on you. making it much more difficult for anybody coming out of our underground. My main concern then is that already we have 136 units in our two buildings. There's about 65 units, I believe, in Kensington, and there's lots of parking there for the retail businesses. So we have a lot of cars coming through that area. What we need then is we don't need any more cars coming in. We don't need cars coming from another 4 buildings that would naturally flow north beside our buildings. One of the really awkward things, I face north, so I look down on Shoppers Drug Mart, and the postal delivery guy comes by at least twice a day. He's there for 15 to 20 minutes. He has to park on the laneway. There's not even a loading zone there. So he totally blocks that corner, and he parks right on the corner because his access into Shoppers Drug Mart is right there. So that's a huge problem that he blocks that corner. Now you're blocked from the left with the brick building coming up from the underground, and now you've got a big postal truck, and you've got now a very narrow way to turn left on a corner. Very dangerous. When you calculate too, in front of our building, we do have a partial loading zone in front of Building A. It's not very deep, but 4 days of the week, we have our recycling bins up there, we have our cardboard waste up there, we have our garbage bins up there. So 4 days of the week, we now have it's sort of our, I guess you would call it our staging area for our garbage pickup. It causes problems. I just made a few notes so I wouldn't forget what I wanted to say. My second issue then is the idea that 4 days a week, we have blockages right in front of our own building. So it's a real vision problem. The drawings indicate, as I said, that the laneway is supposed to go south, but also west at the same time, so putting a curve into it. My suggestion, my hope, is that A, you would say we don't need this laneway extended, or at the minimum, you would say put some bollards up so that it blocks it, so that traffic cannot flow through. And one last comment I'd like to make, and that is just for your interest, and I know you can't do anything about density, but it was interesting on Facebook. I was scrolling through this afternoon, and I happened to see a Facebook page from 2 realtors in our town, and it said 1,200 new condos, homes, and townhouses available in Langley. How many more do we need? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Pauline Holman.
Good evening. My name is Pauline Holman. I'm a owner-resident at B227-20716 Willoughby Town Center Drive. I live in a community called Yorkson Downs. I've been there since day one. I'm going to try not to repeat myself as to what Noran was speaking about, but some of it will be repetitive. When the plans came out, we talked about, I spoke with residents, and again, we're talking about, this is not a roadway between the buildings, it's actually a driveway, because currently it only goes to our parkades. And as Noran had mentioned, our parkades are very narrow, so that when you come into them or out of them, you're having to take a very wide berth because they're so narrow that we've had to put up metal posts, and a lot of people have actually damaged their cars because it's so narrow. And I'm hoping that all the councillors received their email from a resident by the name of Angela Chung, which included photographs. Those photographs are very real, and we're putting up with that on a daily basis. The developer has suggested adjoining a road through their development to our driveway. This doesn't make sense, as we have 136 units, which every unit has at least 2 parking spaces. So you double that you're talking about 272 cars. The new development has 303 units. I'm unaware of how many parking stalls there are, but for argument's sake, let's say there's 303 vehicles. So now you're adding that to 272. You've got Kensington coming through the parking lots to their parkade. And so it's just, it doesn't make sense to have that many vehicles going through such a narrow area. And it's, never mind the parking and the garbage pickup and the UPS deliveries and all of that. Our buildings face each other. And in building A is our gymnasium. In building B is our amenities room. And we have residents going back and forth between that building, crossing that driveway every day. And I would suggest to you that 50% of the residents at Yorks and Downs are retired. They're 65 years and older. We have people that use walkers. We have elderly people with canes, some in wheelchairs. There's no crosswalk that has been marked on that driveway. So people, it creates a danger for the pedestrian. And that's a big concern for us. We also have fuel trucks that come to refuel our generators, and they have to park in front of the Building B entrance to the parkade for hours. So that blocks that parkade. We have our gardeners who actually park at the north end of the buildings, where the postal trucks are, that Noran was talking about, they come around the corner. Well, once you come around that corner, our gardeners have to park there because there's nowhere else for them to park and access all their equipment. So that now becomes a one-way. You can't get by two ways. That's an issue for that. Our postal worker used to come up our driveway and park there and deliver our mail. He no longer does that because it's too difficult for him and his time to have to maneuver around all the trucks and the garbage cans and everything else. So he parks in the north end of the parking lot behind Kensington. What else do I need to say here? So we also have handy dart emergency vehicles that attend frequently because we have a large percentage of seniors. The vehicles are very large and wide, and they can sometimes take up half of the road or half the driveway, which makes it difficult for two-way traffic as well. I understand when I phoned the city, or phoned the township in October of last year, and I spoke with Ruby, I asked her why this was happening, and Ruby advised me that they wanted better access to Willoughby Town Center. Then they thought that it would provide a quicker access for the residents of Yorks and Downs to get to 208. After speaking with a lot of the residents, they disagree with this. And when you stop now, the new development, there's an access to Willoughby Town Center not even a half a block away on 78th. You also have an access to Willoughby Town Center off of 208, and you also have an access to Willoughby Town Center off of 80th. There's also a new road being built from 206 through, which will also have access to Willoughby Town Center. So for the new development to come through our driveway to just have access to Willoughby Center doesn't make sense. I mean, they have an access a half a block away. When I attended the chambers on March the 25th, Councilman Martins suggested that we might look at putting a bollard up or a gate of some kind that would only allow emergency access. And that's really what we're hoping will happen, because Langley, speaking with Councilman Bailey, who suggested to me that the township wanted to make more walkable communities, more walkable neighborhoods. Well, my feeling is the more roads you put in, the less walkable it becomes. So we're asking and hoping that council will definitely consider putting up that emergency gate for access for emergency purposes only, and The other issue that I have is that because we have so many seniors that are on, that have walkers or canes or wheelchairs, the concern is we all live in wooden buildings. They're not concrete. And the majority of buildings in the Willoughby area are wooden. We saw what happened 2 years ago. We saw the inferno on 80th and 208. And those buildings went down in a matter of an hour. And the residents from Yorkson were truly frightened. They were frightened for them. I mean, thank God nobody was living in those buildings. Could you imagine what it would be like if there was? And so it's a real concern, especially for us elderly people. It's just a fear. And when you look at the plan, and I'm not an architect or an engineer, and I don't know how to read perfect plans and whatever, but the development is only going to be 23 feet away from, on our south end, from Building B, and we feel this is inappropriate. And we would like to see a fire lane put in, but a fire lane that would be maybe double the width in order for you to, if, for example, we had a fire on the south end of either one of our buildings, and those embers went into the new development, and that development started on fire as well. We'd like the opportunity to have the firemen to be able to have fire trucks side by side, not end to end. And so we felt that it's too close, and that if council agrees to not opening up our driveway to open access, that there should be a fire lane there.
Just, so you're up on 8 minutes, so the last delegate
Sorry.
also had much more than 5, which we're fine with. But I think if you can get to the punchline. And
Yes.
Then we can, so, because you've had 8 minutes and
I
we're happy.
apologize.
No, you don't have to apologize. But typically it's supposed to be around 5, and I like to be a little lenient around that. But I think we understand your submission. If you have other additional points to make, we can carry on. But otherwise, if we can,
It's the idea that we would like the driveway shut down to an access gate and to widen the space between the new development and Yorkson Downs and put a proper fire lane in there. That's really what we're looking for. And yeah, that's it. So
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Carrie Dunbar.
That's me. I'm sorry.
Who's Pauline?
I'm Pauline, but Carrie unfortunately had dental surgery today and apologizes that she couldn't be here. But she's asked me to read a short thing, and I'll just read what she's
Yeah,
written.
if you could read that into the record, that's fine. Go
Sure.
ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the development permit 101424. As a former realtor, we also grew up in a land development family. I generally take a supportive stance for community growth with an awareness of developers' quest for maximum return and municipalities adding to their property tax revenue. Over my lifetime, I have owned 25 homes, some in established neighborhoods, some in new build neighborhoods. I have never been a NIMBY, not in my backyard, person until now. While this development may meet density and other guidelines, on paper, it is simply too large, as especially 2 of the 4 buildings will abut Yorkson Downs, buildings 2 and 4. If you refer to the renderings, you will see how close those buildings will be to us, leaving neither us nor those new residents any privacy. Building 2 is so close to our Building B that privacy and natural light will all be lost. Building 4, in particular, the west end, is too close as well. Yes, this is a quality of life issue that cannot be understated. Condo living has its challenges. We should not have to live in a fishbowl existence with blinds drawn and balconies abandoned. Building 2 and 4 are also too high, given their proximity to Yorkson Downs at 6 and 5 stories. The rooftop mechanicals, even if shrouded, will be unsightly and surely be noisy. The above-ground garbage and recycling corral will cause daily noise, odors, and surely attract unwanted rodents and pests. Imagine living with that, plus gazing out windows, etc., to that view. In addition to the degradation of our quality of life, our property value will be compromised. During my real estate career, I've seen it multiple times. We are not asking for extreme measures. We are only asking the council support our need for a bit of privacy and space. Finally, I ask that you not allow our driveway to be opened up to the through traffic for this development. It will also become an access point for all the other townhomes south of this development. It is not 39 feet wide as the plan specifies. It is a mere 20 feet, and currently a challenge to navigate with just the comings and goings on our own residents, the moving of dumpsters, delivery vans, etc. It would serve no purpose but to create worsened safety and congestion. Access to Willoughby Town Center via vehicle already exists at 78th Avenue. A never-ending stream of vehicles using our driveway would be miserable for our residents and an accident waiting to happen. In closing, we've come to you with hat in hand, asking and hoping that you will work with us with the common goal of achieving solutions that will make this work for all. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Councilor Bailey, do you have a question for the letter writer?
Yeah, I'm just,
Just want to make sure, this was for the letter written to the record, but you have a question for Pauline?
no, I don't, I've got an amendment.
So we'll get there if that gets that far. Okay, thank you very
Thank-
much. Next speaker is Jay Brayshaw or Bradshaw? Brayshaw. Please come forward.
Hello, I am Jay Brayshaw. I live at 20716 Willoughby Town Center Drive, longest address I've ever had. It's directly north of the building. And thank you for your time tonight. I submitted an email earlier stating a few of the large life safety deficiencies we had at Yorks and Downs that just slipped through the cracks, and they were regarding our generator system and our emergency lighting. Hope you've all had time to read my email and like to think it was a little concerning, but I haven't seen any feedback from it yet. There's a couple other items I wanted to mention. We've also had numerous gas leaks in our building. Some of the parkades, I think 1 or 2 in the units, and our main gas just recently was leaking outside, as well as our mechanical contractor that we hire for maintenance noticed that our sprinkler systems didn't have any pressure reducing valves at all installed in them, meaning that if our fire pumps ran for a significant amount of time, there's a chance of blowing our sprinkler system apart because there's nothing holding the pressure back. So we paid ourselves to have all the gas leaks fixed. We paid to have PRV valves installed on every floor of both buildings because it was just left out by contractors. So my concern is that the township's relying on contractor declarations regardless of the size of the buildings. Now we're getting to 300 plus units in this complex. We're building high rises, and everything seems to be relying on contractor declarations. And that's a lot of liability to rely on contractors who want to get the job done quickly and cost effectively as possible to sign off on life safety. The unit south of us has some of the same shortcuts taken and they go unnoticed. Then what could happen in a major emergency? What if there's a substantial fire and their sprinkler system blows apart instead of supplying water where needed? Then that could affect us as well as affect them. What if there's a minor earthquake and their gas lines or even ours just jiggle apart? What if their generators don't start in an emergency? Ours didn't start for a year. Every time we went to start it, I had to go down, reset it, and start it manually. These kind of things just seem to go on, and somehow we got occupancy, but I'm pretty concerned that it keeps going on. And a unit this big, there could be some serious repercussions. These issues will definitely could affect them and could compromise our safety as well as theirs. And I'd like to know if the township is going to create a full inspection department and actually inspect all stages of construction going forward, or if it's going to keep relying on contractor declarations. I know you guys can't answer that right now, but that's my big concern, is that everything's relying on contractor declarations, and these buildings are getting huge. That's the big part of my concern. I do have numerous others that have been touched on partly tonight. My next big one is the proximity of this new building to ours during construction is a huge concern of mine, and then afterwards, especially if their life safety systems aren't working. The driveway, I think we've touched on the driveway quite a bit tonight, but maybe I haven't read the news enough, but what are we doing to increase our fire services and police and ambulance for all of these? I mean, 1,200 was the number I just heard. I don't know how many, everywhere I look, there's new buildings going up, and I don't know if we're increasing any of those things. Schools, we don't even have enough schools for the buildings we have, let alone all these other ones coming, and it's almost the point where we should stockpile schools first and then get all these buildings built. It's also the roads around Willoughby. Like, the roads are not good. I don't know if anyone can drive down a road without hitting a huge manhole or divots or whatever, but it definitely seems like the housing developments are being greenlit.
Put an engine in that collapse zone, okay? That is, those are death traps. My main concern on this is that pinch point, and that's why I'm saying I'd like to see bollards put in there and stop that. And believe me, if there's a fire access is needed, those guys can get through those bollards pretty quick.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Bailey. I appreciate the amount of time and effort you've put into this one. I certainly support it. I think it makes sense. If you're living at Yorks and Downs, we haven't received a submission asking for that access. And while I take the architects and the proponents consultants' point that if you live at Yorks and Downs and you wish to turn right on 208th Street and head south, perhaps this access would be an improvement. But if there's like any concern that people are going to be using this to transit through that area and the people that live there don't want it, I don't see any harm in providing that bollard. So I certainly support it based upon the residents asking for it. Councillor Martins.
Thank you. And I too support it. I don't know if you saw my hand up vehemently trying to second that. And I've had conversations with many of you as well, and I've spent a lot of time on this because I do care. Before this development permit came to us, I was very aware of the problems there. As my dog's vet is actually in that center right there, and I don't know how many times I've had difficulty with that lane and around that juncture by Shoppers Drug Mart trying to get in, get around, and it is unsafe. And I understand why you are so concerned. And I think just by the number of people here, I'm glad that council made this opportunity available for you to come and speak to it. And I think, as I've mentioned to many of you already, that I too suggested bollards. I think that's a relatively economical fix. I also appreciate that it's not permanent. If things should change, bollards can come and go. But for now, if that gives you peace of mind, that's what's most important. And I acknowledge that you mentioned your population, a high percentage of seniors, and coming and going between the two buildings. And we need to consider your safety first, and it sounds like that's more important. The proponent mentioned that being able to exit south would be a benefit to you, but that's not what's important to you. Thank you for coming. I very much support this. For all of you who have spoken with me, you know my position on this, and I think it's it's an obvious one here. So thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I do appreciate the comments. And, you know, I'm not going to stand in the way of this motion by any means. It means I do understand that the development permit, there were comments from the public as to, you know, defeating the subject and leaving the land bare. That's certainly not the position I have. It's the position of a development permit, and going back to, I don't know what it would be, to rezoning or something is certainly not a position I have. I also did hear a proponent say something about the way that we inspect buildings, the way that deficiencies are something I would look into as well, regardless of this project or whether we should build anything else in the township, and the rest of the township should just be park, and for other comments we got from folks. I don't know if bollards will be the answer. I don't know if it's going to answer entrance or exit to that underground parking. the architect did indicate that it was an odd design, I guess the individual said. Mr. Hogan said it was an odd design. I'm sure he didn't design it. But, you know, we'll see what happens. I don't think the problems will go away. I think this is an opportunity for an entrance and exit for residents. It gets kind of crowded at Willoughby Town Center Way and out there. And also people with the road, and we are repairing that road, but until we get everything in place, it'll be a while before the exits and entrances are a little bit better off 208. But, well, I'm not going to stand in the way of this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Pratt?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I think the suggestion for adding the bollards there is a good one. I think it's a step in the right direction, and I know that one of the speakers discussed potentially having some kind of crosswalk in between the current two buildings. That might not be able to be made a condition of this approval if it's done today, but if that's something that the residents are keen on, I would definitely encourage you guys to keep following up with us on that, because we approved several traffic calming measures today, and I would say that in terms of the things we spend money on as a township, the traffic calming items are a pretty good return on investment. So if that's something that's important, regardless of what happens today, I would definitely encourage people to follow up with that.
Okay, great, thank you. Seeing no discussion, I'll call the question on that additional condition. That carries unanimously. Is there any other discussion on the development permit? Yeah, seeing none. So the development permits are challenging for council based upon the legal process of rezoning versus development permits. The rezoning and the density prescribed was approved by the previous council, and this only came back to council for reapproval because it expired based upon, sounds like provincial delays of housing, which is interesting to hear about. The province delaying housing is interesting, but the process here in terms of making further amendments is very challenging, that they can be challenged, and you know, what would be the basis? Is there any other commentary about the setbacks? We would always like to make the setbacks larger, but that would impact the density that they're legally permitted to have based upon the existing approval. And this is the challenge we have with development permits that don't run concurrently with the rezoning. We're not in a position to make significant changes. And so with that, I do appreciate some of the points that were made about angling the building a certain way here, Councillor Bailey's comments about continued fire protection. Potentially a fire curtain could also be added during construction between the two buildings, and that's something I'll follow up on with the building department. So there are things we can do to mitigate concerns, but there are limitations on what council can do legally that will not just turn around and be challenged by the proponents. So with that, I do appreciate everyone's feedback and all the emails that we have been getting. I know all members of council have read them all, and we forwarded this to an in-person public input opportunity, which is very unusual, I think, to hear your concerns firsthand. So I appreciate everybody's feedback, and I appreciate asking us to make this change, and I appreciate all of council making the steps in the right direction that we're able to make. So with that, I'll call the question on B1. That carries unanimously. Move on to the public hearing, item C1. Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Worship. Item C1 deals with the Migrant Agricultural Farm Worker Accommodation Farm Bylaw. Your Worship, proposed bylaw 6004 amends the Township of Langley zoning bylaw 2500 to bring the Township zoning bylaw to current standards to house migrant agricultural workers in rural zones in the Township under Federal Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program.
If anybody wishes to leave, you're not disturbing us. I don't expect we're going to have a single speaker on this item, so please go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Worship. Newspaper ads for the proposed bylaw ran in the April 18th and 25th editions of the Langley Advance Times, compliant with requirements of the Local Government Act. Also, farm operators who currently host migrant agricultural workers were notified by email or via telephone. There were 2 submissions received, Your Worship, but no individuals noted on the speakers list.
Great. So with that, I'll call for submissions from the public for item C1. Do I have to call for them if there's no one here, Mr. Richardson? I believe legally I do, right?
Legally, you do.
Legal I do. Is there any other submissions from the public on item C1? And for a third and final time, are there any submissions from the public on item C1? Seeing none, I'll close the hearing on the item for C1. Does anybody wish to move for third reading? Moved by Councillor Rint, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Call the question on considering third reading of C1. That carries unanimously. So any wish to move third reading? Moved by Councillor Rint, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on third reading for C1? Seeing none, call the question on C1. That carries unanimously. Mr. Richardson, item C2.
Thank you, Worship. Item C2 deals with family-friendly units under proposed bylaw 5994. Bylaw 5994 updates housing policy within the Fisher Community Plan to include minimum requirements for the provision of 2- and 3-bedroom units in new apartment development. Those include a minimum of 15 of total project units to be 2-bedroom unless otherwise stated, a minimum of 10% of total project units to be 3-bedroom unless otherwise stated, an overall project unit size no less than 699.65 square feet or 65 square meters. The bylaw amendments also include, Your Worship, an 18-month grace period where an application is in stream prior to final adoption, Your Worship. There was one written submission received, Your Worship, and no individuals on the speakers list.
Yeah, we have that written submission. Is there any submissions from the public on item C2? For a second time, are there any submissions from the public on item C2? And for a third and final time, are there any submissions from the public on item C2? Seeing none, close the public hearing on item C2. Does anybody wish to move consideration of third and final reading? Moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Rint. Call the question on, which one is this again? C2. That carries unanimously. I'll move third and final reading. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rint. So I think I might want to consider an amendment here, but we'll go to speakers first. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I completely support the intention of the motion. I think that the realities of demographics are changing and that more and more families are being raised in condos, and we need to be providing space for them. What I will be curious to see is if this is changed unamended, or sorry, if this is approved unamended, what the impacts on the market will be. We've heard from industry, and they have some concerns. They're the ones who build it, but I think it's a step in the right direction, so I'll be curious to see what the amendments are.
Yeah, it's just a slight adjustment. Mr. Richardson, what's the process for a proponent to request a variance to this? It'd be very similar to requesting a reduction in parking requirements, requesting changes to child amenity, age-friendly amenity areas. What would be the process for a proponent who wishes to ask for a variance to this?
Your Worship, I'll start off but ask my colleague, Mr. Chu, who's been lead on this item. The proposed bylaw amendments themselves are housed within the official community plan, Your Worship. So that would, given that they're in the official community plan, it would trigger a plan amendment, Your Worship.
Yeah, so it would be an OCP amendment rather than a variance.
Correct.
Yeah.
So there'd be an OCP amendment to vary that standard, Your Worship. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So with that, I'd like to move an amendment to move it back a little further to where we started. So if council recalls, we started at 750 and had solicited some feedback on this, and I'd like to move an amendment to change it to 67.36 square meters, which is 725 square feet. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Rint. Is there any discussion on that amendment? Councillor Martins.
Thank you. Not a discussion, but can you, if you would mind elaborating on the reason for shifting it back, that would be appreciated.
I have no rationale. I just think it's a good idea. Any other speakers on the amendment? No, seeing none, I'll call the question on the amendment to C2. That carries with Councillor Martins opposed. Now back to third and final reading as amended. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on C2. That carries unanimously. Get a motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Rint, seconded by Councillor Bailey. All those in favor, opposed, and that's carried. Thank you.